Chris Hayes recently interviewed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. And this interview showed two important things. One, it showed why we need young voices. It shows why we need assertive voices, knowledgeable voices, progressive voices in the Democratic Party. Why it is essential. But number two, it also shows that we need to have people who can actually listen to the questions that are being asked by the mainstream media, whether they're good ones or good hosts or not. In this case, she was interviewed by Chris Hayes, a very good host, but a very technocratic host. And I love what Ocasio-Cortez did here. What she did is she broke down a complicated concept that is very real, what Chris Hayes was speaking about, tax credits, etc. But most Americans don't understand those things. And she put it in everyday language, why it is that the government is shut down, why it is that Democrats are fighting for this particular issue. Listen to this conversation. It's a snippet of the conversation. It's important, but it also shows how Democrats and progressives should answer questions. Answer the specific question, but also put it into a form that addresses what people looking for bread, butter, and sustainability are looking for. She did a great job. Listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Right now, there's this sort of back and forth about the ACA tax credits. And there's kind of a strange dynamic that I want to get your sense of, right? Because at one level, negotiating over the ACA tax credits is important. I mean, there are people who are going to see their premiums go up 15, 20%, like huge amounts are going to spike. Republicans don't like these extenders. Democrats do. They think it's good for people. But that's fully in the lane of like normal politics. And then at the same time, like the president of the United States assembled 800 military commanders to say, I want you're going to have to go to war against your fellow citizens in American cities. And I think people are having a little bit of a hard time of like, we're going to have a fight on the shutdown about the tax credits, but not about the president wants to declare war on Americans, even though I understand those two are conceptually distinct. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, Chris, but I think that's something for us to really set the record straight here on. This is not a fight over tax credits. This is a fight over your ability to go to a pharmacy and afford your insulin. We're not talking about just 15 or 20% increases in people's premiums. Tomorrow, healthcare companies and today, healthcare companies are finalizing the premiums that everyday Americans are going to be paying. And we are talking about a doubling of monthly healthcare premiums, not even including your deductible, in terms of what people are going to be paying next year because of $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts that were put together earlier this year. And I don't know about anybody else, but I do not think that this is just about a tax break or a small tax extender. This is about fighting not just on tax breaks, community health centers, and ensuring that we have a stability of the American healthcare system. And when Republicans use a legislative mechanism to gut the American healthcare system, we have to use a legislative mechanism in order to restore it and to fight for it. Because at the end of the day, people may talk about tax credits this and tax credits that. What they do understand is when you have insulin and you can't afford it. What they do understand is when your kid has chemotherapy or your spouse gets diagnosed with cancer and you go into a hospital and it doesn't get covered. And you have to choose life and death, what this is about. Now, that does not mean that we ignore the abhorrent violation of law and norms and what is happening with our U.S. cities. But we have a broad spectrum of ways and places that we can fight, including our governors, our attorney generals, and our state and municipal leaders, as you just saw.
So I just want to make sure I understand this just from your perspective here. So, and I think this is generally the view of congressional leadership as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If there was bipartisan compromise, right? If everyone came together, the leaders of the parties, the president, and said, yes, these 5 things, we're going to make sure that these premium supports keep going. We're going to fund community health centers, whatever the sort of asks on appropriation around people's affordable health care. If those were met, Democrats would be a yes. Like, that is the box that this is happening in, as opposed to, we can't fund a Department of Justice that prosecutes political enemies or whatever else might be out there.
Well, let me tell you, Chris, the mechanism by which that deal is locked is not just about agreeing in concept on tax credits. We need to do it with no tricks, no games, and no backdoors, which includes rescissions. And when we talk about rescissions,
right,
that is the mechanism that the federal government is using to gut and destroy rule of law across the board. So we are fighting to ensure that healthcare is protected for every American. But the way that we do that also means that the only way that you guarantee that is by forcing them to adhere to the rule of law, which means eliminating the rescission loopholes that they put in the CR earlier this year, which the Senate unfortunately had caved on then, and we're ensuring that doesn't happen now.
Yeah, the quick 10-second version for people that haven't followed this is that, you need 60 votes to get the filibuster to appropriate funds for the government, but they can pass a rescission, which is to claw back some of the money already agreed to, by 50 votes. So they have this kind of like cake and eat it too model where it's like, oh yeah, we'll come together, we'll pass a bipartisan appropriations bill, and then when we've done that, then we'll go and get rid of the stuff we don't like, which just seems like an insane way to negotiate.
It's no way to negotiate. And again, we don't even have to get into the technicalities of this. But what is important to understand is that the way that you honor an agreement and the way that we honor our fight for healthcare and to define and to also protect everyday Americans' ability to afford their healthcare, to cover their kids, to defend Medicaid, those are the same mechanisms that we use to defend our rule of law, to defend the federal workers that we are trying to protect in this shutdown. Donald Trump is trying to play this bluffing game of, well, maybe what we're going to do is hold all the federal workforce hostage and fire everybody. Donald Trump has been firing everybody. We saw this with DOJ. We've seen this at the State Department. We've seen this at the Department of Justice. They are firing everybody. They are completely eliminating the federal workforce. And in order for us to stop this madness, we have to put a stop to it, and we have to stop enabling their abuse of power, including their use of rescissions. And when we're fighting on their health care, it forces them to act in ways in accordance with the law in other ways too.
In my opinion, I think AOC knocked it out of the park. A few sessions ago, I kept on saying, let's stop talking about food insecurity and start talking about Americans starving and being hungry. That is what the people that are starving and hungry realize. And if you're fighting for them and you want them to vote for you, you have to have them understand what they're voting for you for. They're not voting for you to solve, as far as they're concerned, food, that nebulous word, food insecurity. They're fighting for you to stop them from starving, to solve their hunger. The government shutdown isn't occurring because of tax credits to billionaires. Of course, that's the underpinnings. It is being shut down because you will die if you don't have the health care that you can get. If you lose your health care, if you have no subsidies for health care, you will likely lose your health care. If you lose your health care, you have a higher possibility of what? Dying. So speak English for the people to understand. And that is what Ocasio-Cortez did. She never not answered the question. She answered the question for both domains, both the bread and butter folk and for the technocrats. All of our country's problems, from polarization to ignorance on domestic and international issues to a complete misunderstanding of our economic and healthcare systems, are a direct result of a derelict mainstream media that too often bend over backwards to support corporate or bought politicians' wants as opposed to the people's needs for real information to make their lives better. Independent media is the only solution to inform truthfully and factually. Why? Because our loyalties are to you, the ones who fund us with small dollar contributions and subscriptions. Please consider supporting our independent media platforms by subscribing to our Egberto Off the Record newsletter at politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Again, that is politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's an investment that pays incalculable dividends.